welcome back to this week's episode of our show, Urban Transcendence, Alia Mashtas and Martin Despang's show. So today is a special, well, every show is a special one, but this one here is introducing the subject matter of building. So the whole show is about building culture, and we could pronounce it as being the building culture or the culture of buildings. And me as an architect and an architectural educator, whenever I have the chance to introduce the discipline of architecture in a nutshell to an audience that's not disciplinary, I always allow myself to quote the great philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein, who has, by the way, also built one of the most magnificent buildings in the world for his sister in Vienna in the last century, the Wittgenstein house, had defined architecture as being a gesture. And he said, unlike every movement of the human body is not a gesture, nor is every building architecture. And I always like that. There's a distinguishment between the mere presence of a building, which serves primary purposes of shelter, and then there is the aspect of architecture. And architecture has the wow factor, we can say, in a more populistic way. So with that, today is the first time we're going to actually talk about the making of the built environment. We had a couple guests here ever since the beginning of the show. They were about the thinking of the built environment, and great critical thinkers. At a certain point, hopefully these ideas become a reality. And then we need people who make them happen. And so today we got our first representatives of the building industry, we could call them. And by the way, there's an organization here that you guys, if I'm not mistaken, are members. That's the BIA, the Building Industry Association. It's an organization, a roof organization, which has ambitious people from the building industry being organized and teaming up, doing events. For example, there are two shows. One is in August, and the other one is at the end of the year, I think. They're Remodel It Right shows where they're usually in the Blaisdell Center, so it's open for the public, and everyone can come. So we talk about architecture being a gesture, and we have another guest here, a young gentleman here. Welcome as well. he might want to come over and
fine by me.
He probably loves your product. So when I came to the island here 2 years ago, my first impression was about the absence of building, because I came off the concourse and I stepped outside. It was an amazing experience that, by the way, my youngest son, when he visited, he immediately said, that smell. So it was amazing. That experience, you come from mostly through the mainland, I mean the way I come, and then you go through hermetic air-conditioned spaces, and here it's all of a sudden all open. So the next amazing sort of feature was that here you're basically comfortable if you're under a tree. And that's why we call this show here today Ecoshaded Treetecture. So I invent these names, and so Treetecture is the attempt to make us think about that maybe all we need here to be comfortable is a roof. So that being said, I think 2 days after I came here, I ended up on the BIA show in 2012, I guess, in August. And we had, they're great, representatives of the building industry around, and a lot of products, but there was one product that hit me like nothing else, and ever since I'm in touch with you guys and dream about your product, and not only dream about it, I'm also going to show one example where we actually collaborated and made a proposal to make it happen. So with that, hopefully not too long introduction, but I thought it was necessary. I want to welcome today's guest, who is Brandon Weaver and Nik Beezum, who are both from Ecoshade.
Correct.
Brandon is the owner, and Nik is the director of operation. So with that, thank you for being here. Thank you very
pleasure.
much. And
having us.
tell us a little bit where you come from, first of all,
Okay.
and then obviously somehow lift that secret, what Ecoshade is.
Sure. Right, well, I grew up in Australia, just close to Sydney. My father was a builder, so I grew up building. I was in that kind of a field. My mother grew up in Hawaii, so I became familiar with a bunch of different building products in Australia. And one that I really liked was the Ecoshade roof. So I later on decided to move to Hawaii and see what the scene was like out here. And we, along with Nik, we collaborated and developed a new product similar to what we'd worked with in Australia and tried to perfect it and make it compatible with the environment here.
Mm-hmm.
Introduce yourself, Nik?
Myself, yeah, also from Australia, and I guess our connection to louvered roofing comes from Australia, stems from Australia. It's an Australian product, and Hawaii has similar elements to places you find in Australia, and it is a super popular product in Australia. Yeah, so I came out to Hawaii originally to study. I studied business, and I actually met Brandon's older brother first. We've been mates for a long time, and then got to know Brandon.
Mm-hmm. We could also talk German, by the way, but the audience doesn't have to be afraid.
Please
we
do.
won't. Yeah.
True, I married a girl from Berlin. I speak German.
There you go. So we do that all the time, but we spare you guys from that, doing that now. So what is Ecoshade?
Okay, so Ecoshade, our primary product is our louvered roof. It's a roof system primarily for an indoor-outdoor space. So it's just a photo of one of our applications over on the west side of the island. So he has his living room opens out into a deck, and then there's a pool right there. So he wanted some shade. There's too much sun, especially in the afternoon, that was coming right in through his windows. It was making it too hot, and his furniture was getting bleached by the sun. So I wanted something that would still maintain a breeze. So our product worked out perfect. So we've got some samples here of what our product is. And this is a louver, and it's extruded aluminum. It's powder coated. So it has a very strong finish. The way it works is it creates a solid roof. Can I see that in the camera?
Mm-hmm.
So when it's closed, it creates a solid waterproof roof. It'll be put on a slight pitch to allow for drainage, and with the remote control you can operate it and open it to any position you want. And so it'll open something like this, all the way back to there, and then back closed again. You can stop it at any position you want for the amount of sunlight or shade, or complete shade when it's closed, and rain protection.
Mm-hmm. That was a great analog demonstration. Jay just told us that he was fascinated. They had a fuel cell yesterday here in the show, and he said it was just magic to feel that and to touch that. So from an architectural point of view, again, all you need is a roof here. That being said, you could make a roof, then you get the what I call the umbrella effect, where basically under an umbrella it's a couple degrees cooler, and here we got the trade winds, so that's good. However, it's still going to get hot, and the hot air is going to rise up due to physics. And when the hot air rises up, it gets stuck basically up there, and it pushes down. And that's the phenomenon why actually we sometimes feel hot under an umbrella. So that's why, coming back, the tree is that genius invention by nature, because it has porosity. So the leaves have these voids between the leaves, and this is where actually the heat can escape and basically leave the system and keep. This is why the tree is the most ideal shading device. Then only when it rains, it is kind of rain tied for the little minutes or the little seconds, and then depending on how strong it rains, it basically you get soaked as well under a tree.
Yep.
So that's the downside of the tree. So again, I was walking through the show, and I saw a lot of basically hermetic building components that were about sealing yourselves in, wall systems, foamed insulated walls, and all that stuff, all these goodies. And all of a sudden, there was this kind of awakening moment, and I walked along your guys' aisle, and then your niche, and I saw this product, and it just like totally fascinated me. And in Germany, I always dreamt of one of my childhood experiences is that well, the audience probably, if you have watched a couple of shows, you know I grew up in a dense urban environment, and my front yard and backyard was a roof terrace, and basically my parents built a wooden deck there and a wooden trellis. So that kind of experience, kind of sleeping outside, is one of my most memorable experience from my childhood, that my parents let me sleep outside and I got to watch the stars. And whenever it rained, they came and brought me inside, basically take care of their son. Nice of them. Thanks, Mom and Dad, by the way. So that childhood memory, I think, sort of resonated with me when I started to was fascinated, and I still am, about the beauty and the cultural and climatic, state of privilege we have here. And then, what do we do? How do we basically shelter ourselves? And so then I thought Ecoshade is doing all that, which you basically always dreamed you could do that in Germany, but you can only do it, you're there quite often. And so these few, weeks or month, if you're lucky in a year, you can have that. But otherwise, you got to wall yourself in, whereas here you don't have to do that. So that's why, Ecoshade, for me, is sort of a mankind interpretation of a tree, because it's basically doing all these things that the air rises up, and then basically you open it, and you can basically exhaust the hot air through the system. Obviously, the sort of the position of the louvers should be determined by the sun angle. So whenever the sun, is not welcome, you can block it out. And so sounds too good to be true, right? And it is good. And so how does it work? How do you operate it?
So it completely depends. We can either install a switch or a remote control. But either way, we have a 12-volt battery, which is plugged into a 5-watt solar panel. So it's not a very big one.
So and that's the actual size.
Yeah, this is the actual one. It just sits on the lid of a box where we keep the battery and the remote system. And it just keeps that battery fully charged. And that's what it operates off. So there's no hard wiring or anything like that. But the roof, it's just able to offer the versatility that people want. We talk to people all the time. They don't want their room to be completely darkened by an awning out the front. But then again, they don't want to get wet when they go outside. And so this is kind of the right in the middle. They get both, best of both worlds.
And there is a rain sensor, right? And the rain, or there could be a rain sensor.
Yeah, we
the
can install a rain
sensor
sensor.
Basically does the job when you're not at home, and you leave it open when you leave, and you have maybe this kind of nice leather furniture below or something like that. Although probably your system encourages more to have a more outdoorsy lifestyle underneath, so furniture should be more like able to not get ruined when there's a drop of water getting to it, right?
Yeah,
but
in Hawaii, you never know which direction the weather's going to come. It's not always coming straight down.
Exactly. So you have been optimizing the system. I think the one that I saw to begin with was a little bit more boxy, and then you basically the last kind of model revision.
We're always trying to upgrade the system, make it last longer, be more durable, stronger. So we did have a different shape louver. This one can carry more water. It's got a deeper trough in here. So in the heavy rains, it's not going to want to spill over. So when it's in the closed position, it's going to have to fill up a lot of water in this drain to be able to overflow.
And also this lip here prevents any driving wind from blowing anything up and over. It'll blow it and it'll goes sideways. And we have an internal gutter system. It's 5.5 inches, so it's fairly substantial.
Yeah, yeah.
And that'll catch any of the water on the inside, and then we just downspout it as we need to.
Also, a thing with this lip is when the louver's closed, it has water, a few drops on top after rain. When you open it up, the water's going to drain down. It's going to catch in this little groove here. And when it's on a slight pitch, the water's just going to run straight off. Before, when we'd open it all the way back, you'd have a few drops coming down.
Okay.
So that's another little addition we've made.
Brilliant.
So far, I think your application has mostly been, as your one example showed, and you got a couple of other ones, and basically outdoor areas, kind of barbecue areas, pool areas,
Yeah, by the
patios.
pool, on decks, we do a lot of decks.
Yeah, maybe you can mention a couple of projects that it was applied to, so maybe people know and can
Sure.
check it out.
So some of the, I guess, commercial applications we've done the McDonald's at Waikele. They have an outdoor eating area, so we covered that.
Cool Pancake House at Moanalua Shopping Centre. Trump.
Yeah, Trump Hotel in Waikiki, up on the pool deck on the 6th floor. They have a long area they've got a bar and a restaurant and a bunch of outdoor seating, and we've covered that whole area for them. And they actually had us come back and do the other side of the building just a few months ago.
So they must have been happy.
They're very happy with it.
I recently completed Duke's in Ka'anapali on Maui.
Okay.
They did a large extension, and we were subcontracted to provide the roof for that.
Done a lot of churches. They always have outdoor areas where they want to get together, and it's either too hot or it's raining or something like that.
Unity Church was the most recent one, just in Waikiki.
Yep.
It's a fairly big roof.
Yeah, several other restaurants. We do the PF chains.
So,
there's a long list. We could keep
Yeah.
going, but our customers are very happy. We very frequently go back to install another roof in a different area. So it's been good.
So myself, always looking for sort of innovating the built environment. I'm going to show a little bit and share with the audience what we've been doing together.
Sure.
And so that's the audience probably heard about the H Home by now, which is this development proposal with DHHL, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the Building Industry Association, and the School of Architecture to design an alternative for the way to live in Hawaii, for a Hawaiian dwelling. And it's also related to our co-host Ali Yamashita. This is the moment where Ali and I met here, captured by Hung Jun, as you as well know, around the H Home. And the H Home is basically 4 quadrants pavilion around a central space. So this is how it looks like when you basically approach the house. You walk over an aquaponic pond that is sort of the soothing transitioning from your life in the public to the private realm. And you can already see in the distance that there is something here that is different. So what we try to do is basically have the 4 pavilions being relatively low and having a more or less flat roof. So you're going to go through sort of compression of space to then have this compression be released in the center of the home. So the center part here is the big gathering space, the big communal space where the family basically gets together. So whereas the 4 pavilions, the quadrants, are more sort of intimate, I would say, in their feeling, and there can be more retreat. Some of them are the bedrooms and the kitchen. In the central space, it's really about coming together and also engaging again the elements in the outdoors. The whole house is naturally ventilated, but for the central space, we thought would be ideal to apply the Ecoshade system here. So that's the central space that is sort of from its form or its sectional quality a little bit borrowed or inspired by the traditional holly. So that kind of pitched roof, but rather than doing that with thatch, because thatch is not around anymore, There's this interesting phenomenon talking about cultures and their progression in civilization, that the island of Sylt, I don't know if you're familiar with Sylt. Sylt is on the north side of Germany, so it's along the North Sea. And there's a little island which is like the most fancy island in Germany that you can have, as fancy as you can get. So there's many desires, and it's basically taken over by non-indigenous people with money. And they have these sentimental dreams and desires of living in these vernacular homes, which are brick homes with thatched roofs. So to a point that there isn't enough material left anymore, so they actually get shipped in from Bulgaria, which kind of is a little absurd then, and kind of defeats the kind of the purpose. But that's how societies seem to kind of develop, sometimes in a more nostalgic, kind of sentimental way. We try to do the opposite. We try to sort of test and check what of the sort of values are still true and are still applicable today. And we found out that the Ohana living is still pretty much practiced. So this coming together space in the center. And we found Ecoshade the ideal material for that roof application here. A little closer. Thank you, Marshall. So obviously here we have, you might be curious about the materiality that's rendered here. This is a rendering, so it's Hung Jun's master work of elusive, suggestive animation, computer animation. But we actually proposed, and this is in addition to you guys, you can, there are certain standard colors in your palette.
We do have standard colors, but we can order any color you want.
And in this case here, we were proposing a special color that again has a certain relationship to cultural heritage, but we will talk about that after we take a short break. So we will be back in a couple of minutes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rafi. Every week, I'm right here at ThinkTech Hawaii, 3 p.m. on Mondays. My show is Boards' Bio Briefings. What do we do here? Well, we watch sperm swim, we see if they catch anybody, we check out the latest biosimilars, you know, the kind that, what was his name, the guy with the bicycle? I guess we forgot his name, but he was taking EPO and other human growth factors. We'll be talking about human growth factors. You want to know where to get some? Maybe I'll tell. Anyway, you can catch me, as I said, every week right here, Monday, 3 p.m., ThinkTech Hawaii, Dr. Rafi. You can also find me on Twitter, BioInfoMedical. Or you can catch me on Facebook, Dr. Rafael Boritzer. I'll be happy to converse with you. Aloha.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to today's Urban Transcendence episode of Ecoshade Treetecture with our guest Brandon Weaver and Nik Beezum. So before the break, we talked about the possibility to customize the color to your like. Obviously, white, by the way, has the benefit of being reflective, as opposed to darker surfaces who absorb and then by nature get hotter. But again, due to your system, you can vent the heat that you create out pretty fast and cool your roof. So you can also call it a cool roof, which the roofing industry does a lot for their roof membranes.
Yes, absolutely.
So we don't want to confuse that, but I think it's legitimate to actually, yours is actually a way cooler roof, both literally and figuratively speaking, than what the membrane industry wants to sell when it comes to coating. So in this case here, we proposed a customized copper coating. And this copper coating, so it's a powder coating. It's not copper, but it's basically coated with a paint, as you explained, in that color to have the effect that refer to something that's a cultural heritage of Hawaii, which actually now we're to 90% dependent on fossil fuel. Only 100 years ago, there was no dependency. And Hawaiians basically went to sleep when it got dark, up to the point where they found this magic nut, kukui nut, and that kukui nut has oil, and they found out they can burn that. And that's how the tiki torches came about. And so the tiki torch is basically sort of an invention, a pretty clever invention, and it's also then by utilizing the tiki torch, it's an articulation or a gesture, coming back to Wittgenstein, of social gathering, because then they came together and they could extend their daily hours into the night, and the tiki torch became that symbol, that kind of beacon for that. So we try to take advantage of that. So when the family comes together, the ohana comes together in the central space, the light in the space will shine and basically will be reflected by the louvers. And this is an architectural models that the students build. We can see this pretty fascinating and compelling kind of appearance of that glowing holly. And again, so it's sort of taking aspects from tradition and basically innovating them through a system that is not indigenous, because we live here and now. We have modern technology. This is all basically high-end industrially produced, prefabricated, and can be very, very efficiently installed. So again, here's another last kind of an impression how spectacular that would look, and give a very warm feel for the space below, because indirect light is the best light. So actually the whole roof becomes a lighting feature that illuminates the whole central space. So we had displayed that at the BIA show the semester after, and had models then, had renderings, and we had a very positive feedback and resonance from the people, and so we're still working on further developing that kind of project. Again, I believe a very innovative kind of a system. Another topic I got really fascinated about, that actually a couple of our students are investigating, and also some of my colleagues, that's the aspect of resilience. So resilience means we will have harsher impacts of weather, and hurricanes on the islands is an event that we hope doesn't strike, but it has, and it most likely will. So whereas the building code, and currently Howard Wick, who is the one who introduced me to ThinkTech, by the way, so thank you, Howard, is working on the revision of the building code to basically add a chapter of a tropical code. And that might change things significantly, because so far what the International Building Code has done is being basically pretty much invasive and superimposing mainland standards on Hawaiian building culture that is pretty questionable, as the least to say. So there's some hope. And so when we just had a Dr. Architectural meeting with Shenton, who has Glenn Miyasato on his panel, and I think I'm going to bring Glenn into the show. He doesn't know yet, but he didn't know until yesterday, right?
Yep.
So that's the fun of it. So Glenn was talking about your guys' product, also very, very innovative, because why trying to withstand the forces of nature by making something hermetic? Because then you create a surface, and that surface can be hit. So everyone who sails knows that when there's a storm coming, you got to bring the sail down, because otherwise you're going to be blown away. So when you have a wall and you make that wall hermetic, you got to reinforce this, you got to make it stronger, you got to make it thicker, Whereas your product here goes the opposite way. It's almost like taking the sail down. In a case of a hurricane, you basically open the roof and let the breeze go through.
Correct. Yep.
It's usually our last words of advice. When we hand over that remote,
Yeah.
remember, in case of a hurricane,
Yeah.
open the roof.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so just release the uplift and let
Yeah.
that wind pass through and worry about everything else. And then if your house comes down, you've got somewhere to move afterwards.
Perfect, perfect. And that's the other analogy to me to trees, because trees are able to withstand hurricanes pretty wisely because they're dynamic, right? And
Yep.
also the leaf structure
They give.
isn't a fixed surface, isn't a hard surface that's going to be hit hard. It's somehow dynamic, so your system is. So there's on many levels, I think there's this kind of analogy to nature. And I always try to tell my students, don't try to imitate nature. Don't try to mimic nature. Observe and analyze nature and then apply the principles you learned to architecture. So obviously this doesn't look like a leaf, you know, it's not soft, it's not organic, because, you know, it lasts, you know, and it's, so some people might, there's always I just recently learned, I'm still learning the English language, so Debbie Downer is a, you heard of Debbie Downer?
Downer.
So when Debbie Downer would come and would basically say, well, you know, don't you know that aluminum is the material that needs the most energy to be produced amongst all building materials? What do you guys say if Debbie comes?
Debbie. The reason we've come up with this material is just because that's what lasts.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the initial output would require more energy, but this is going to last longer than something else. And so less energy then, but then you've got to replace it, and then you've got to replace it, and you've got to replace it. Whereas this, I fully imagine that most installations will outlive me. It might not look good by the end, but it's going to last a lot longer and it'll be looking good for a lot longer.
Yeah, yeah. And you hit an excellent point, because that's what we should never forget, that the major aspect of sustainability, how we call it, is longevity.
Yeah.
How long something is in the life cycle, because then
Exactly.
we get that carbon footprint that we had to use.
Yeah.
And there's another aspect that I always bring up sort of on behalf of the aluminum industry and you guys, which is that aluminum is, as far as the recyclability, it has the best performance. So it's
We always recycle all of our.
Yeah, all of our scrap, all of our offcuts.
So theoretically, this is just for our more global education, is if we wouldn't create more demand for aluminum, we could basically get by with what we have and constantly recycle that.
Yep.
So that's a great aspect. And here, again, we all know how salty the air is. So whenever you use steel and you have to galvanize it and you have to duplex coat it or something, it's only going to last so long. And as you correctly said, aluminum is not going to rust it can, you know, change its appearance if you have, you know, if we say the powder coating would disappear after a while, but the aluminum is not going to rust away. It's not going to oxidize away.
Yeah, it's one of our main concerns from our customers is it going to rust? How long is it going to last? Because from experience, they see anything they've put on their house is going to rust. If it's fabric, it just rots away. But the aluminum really does perform very, very well. And the paint, from the manufacturer, we get a 35-year warranty just on the powder coat finish. So it is built to last.
Just maybe to give a little bit more idea for the audience how it works. So there's tracks along the sides.
Correct.
Yeah, I
The
can
track-
We'll grab a few pieces to show how it works.
build.
Great.
So 2x8 framing,
You can see it's a
completely hollow.
hollow 2x8 beam.
We attach a gutter, which would be internal. So this would be the outside. So it's a really clean finish. The inside is like this. There's a track that gets installed through here.
The louvers have pins that pop in both of ends here, which allow it to pivot and swivel. So these pins lock into the track right here, and they can pivot like so. So the track on either side of the beam, the gutter's on the inside. We install the louvers, right there. So they fit together like so into this track. There's another track that attaches each louver to the next. So we have a small motor that that turns and operates it and opens. So,
Look at us.
and back. That's basically how it works. And the water's draining off the end here, down into our gutter, which will go down to a downspout, down the post, so on.
As you guys know, I keep bugging you guys ever since we met, give you a hard time about my analogy to my old Lincoln Town Car where the power windows are shot and Martin hasn't yet found the time to replace them. So I'm trying to say, since the system and the tracks is actually so durable and so simple because it's all mechanic, so people might say, well, there's a lot of technology involved, and with technology goes the danger of things breaking. You guys are basically saying no, because the tracks are pretty simple mechanical
Very,
tracks.
very simple.
Yeah, for our own benefit, we've tried to make the simplest system that we possibly can.
So you get new customers and don't have to go back and repair it
Exactly,
all the time.
because it's a waste of everyone's time.
If any of those components did break, it's mainly just 4 components. They're all easily accessible. You're talking like the same motor that operates power windows in a car, the same remote that might open your garage door. So it's all, and then the solar panels. Just a regular 5-watt solar panel. You can just plug into a 12-volt battery, which is basically the same battery as motorbikes use. So every single thing that we use is worst case scenario. If it needed replacing, unplug it, put a new one in. So I mean, with this, I always say, so I have to correct myself now that I know. I always say it's a square foot of, but that's even less of photovoltaics.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Yeah.
So the amount of energy you need is very little, and that's because aluminum, your material choice, is so light. The material is so light, so you don't have to move a whole lot of mass.
And typically, our customers aren't out there opening and closing it all day long. It's just come out in the morning, maybe open it, let some light in. So it doesn't use that much power. So maybe afternoon sun, they can block the sun, still have the blue sky above, and you have ventilation.
And then it starts to rain.
Close it up.
Maybe once or twice a day.
So for Martin, with his extreme post-fossil kind of vision, you can probably make a crank, a manual crank. So Martin goes and has to do it by hand. But on the other hand, again, coming back to the H home, which is again competing with the standard homes, and the standard homes are marketed as highly energy efficient homes, but that, again, I use my analogy again, is like wearing a winter coat here in Hawaii, which then you have to have let's say a hat that has a wind turbine on and a thin film PV that powers a fan that drags out the heat under your coat, which you could do, but it's not the most obvious way to do. But these are the homes, that have been promoted as being energy efficient. And then I think the most extreme is that then people can, when they come home from their long commute, they can control the energy of the air conditioning on their iPhone, and they can set it from 75 to 72. However, outside it's 74. So we start to think, what's the whole thing for? But it's about, in a market, we thought, it's about the gadgets, it's about the cool. So it's appealing to people to say, okay, I can play with the air conditioning of my home. So I was envisioning here in this home here, when basically the people with this little different looking home would invite their neighbors over, and they would sit in this spectacular central holly and take out their remote, and all of a sudden the roof opens, and it just basically blows people away, because this is a real spectacle. And that way here in this sort of more traditional form of the holly work particularly well, because all the lower roof areas would actually be sort of, the air would be extracted into the central space, and opening the louvers would basically take out the heat. And also would be combined with, we had the big ass fan company being interested in providing the big ass fan. Maybe we should bring big ass fan people here as well next time, because it's another very innovative product that can actually sort of discriminate fossil air conditioning pretty effectively. So the combination of these systems we thought would be pretty ideal, and also pretty spectacular, because then you have something to really kind of show. And again, for me, it was sort of back to my childhood memories, because there was some talk about where are the bedrooms and how many bedrooms you have, and I said maybe we have to redefine the definition of a bedroom, for me, it would be my tatami mat that I roll out, and I would predominantly live in that space and watch the stars, because there's no place that I know is better in the world to watch the stars than here, or the moon the last couple of days.
Yeah,
which is, I mean, it was incredible. That moon was amazing. If I can fall asleep by watching that moon, I sleep like a baby. And I would not do that if I'm sleeping in my air-conditioned home, that fan or whatever system is running all the time. So I think it's really a powerful, and you know, that kind of gets me to, I learned from Cornelia Oberlander, who is the grand lady of landscape architecture. See, she's originally German, but had lived in Canada for many years and is in Vancouver, has worked with the greatest architects in the world. And I had the privilege to meet her through my colleague, Judith Stilgenbauer, recently, who is our new landscape architect in the program. And Cornelia was here and introduced to me the differentiation between invasive, and she said there's obviously the negative invasive, and we know this is when stuff takes over other stuff and becomes, you know, dominates and suppresses the indigenous, the original. But then she pointed out, we drove around the Big Island a little bit, and she pointed out some areas where there was some green grass, and she said, you know, this grass is invasive, but it's not pushing anything away. Without that grass, it would all be dead and lava rock. So this is a good invasive. So ever since I apply that kind of explanation or theory to things on the islands of Hawaii, including people, by the way, but including products. So I allow myself to say that I think this is a very positive, invasive product that comes from somewhere else, culturally, yes. And the material isn't homegrown in Hawaii, but because of the arguments we brought up, you know, it's a very culturally and climatically sensitive material to the islands of Hawaii, because once installed, when put in place, it's not doing any harm anymore to the environment, because it's basically self-sustained, and that's a huge advantage, I think to a system like that. So. We have, you have a couple more projects to show?
Oh yeah,
if you
just
want
I
to.
have a bunch of residential applications, just to give a better idea of exactly what we do. So this is a pretty standard residential application, where we tie into the eave of the home. We just span out and have two posts. Because we're using aluminum, we can have fairly lengthy spans between our supports, which is also a benefit to a lot of people. They don't want to obstruct the view. And then also a common application would be freestanding structures. We can cover any size, any shape, as long as we have right angles to work with. Otherwise, the louvers wouldn't rotate. But yeah, we can build into multiple bays. We can program them independently, so you could have one closed and one open at the same time, which is perfect if you're grilling and you want the smoke to go somewhere else, but maybe your other people want some shade. But yeah, we've built all over the island, so there's a ton of photos, so if we want to show them all.
So again, what I keep bugging you guys with, and I want to go there because I'm so fascinated. So ever since that, I think it was my second or third day on the islands, and I met you guys, I met your product, I told myself, that's going to be the house. The house is Ecoshade, that's it. So if we say all you need is a roof, then all you want is an Ecoshade roof.
Right.
And that's what I call
Sounds good to us.
Ecoshade Treetecture, because it's doing all that. And I can only say, due to the limitations here in the studio, which is great, but you guys out there have to see this in action. I mean, the magic starts when that thing starts to open and close, and with it, the play of light and shade, it's just like amazing. And then you imagine that shadow walking on your floor. It's just absolutely gorgeous, absolutely magic. It just changes everything. So I would definitely. Again, I'm working on, so I have something here unsolicited, which is very kind of sketchy yet at this point here, which is a project that I'm imagining, which is actually the all eco-shaded roof. there's an architect also. There's a lot of tradition and history, and should be in architecture, because we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should turn the wheel. There's an architect called Paul Rudolph who's pretty famous in architectural history, and in his early years, he worked in Florida, and he did a house that was called the Umbrella House. There was also an architect in Tucson who was called Judith Chafee, who did a similar house. So this is kind of a rethinking, a reinterpretation of that home. It's basically taking another element that is sort of, could be positive invasive, or we can convert it into a positive invasive, which is the shipping container. So if we take 4 40-footers and have them pinwheel in plan around a central space again, as we can see on this diagram. Thank you, Marshall, trying to zoom as good as one can to that drawing. And have then basically the whole building being covered with Ecoshade entirely to get an impression. It's very light and sketchy by me, but hopefully people can see. So that's the idea, to basically have that roof spanning over it. The same concept here, that you have the 4 shipping containers basically as your corners, and you would have a steel grid system above the shipping containers, would have the Ecoshade on top of that. So in case of and then you basically cut out the sides of the shipping containers, which currently they built a rail, and so up there in Couple Lake, Hewitt has started to put up their construction site, so they have used shipping containers in a similar way. That kind of encouraged us to do that. And so you would cut out the sides of the shipping containers and put what you cut out back on tracks that you can move. So you basically can open and close the shipping container as you can open and close the roof. And since it's all metal, you basically strap everything down at the corners of the shipping containers where the loads go. And again, you could be called the ultra-resilient home, because again, in case of a hurricane, you do the opposite of what you'd conventionally do, where you board up your house. And here, as you explained, you open up the house. If I'm not mistaken, even under current code, which is not the tropical code, but the IBC, the International Building Code, I think you're close to having reached Category 5 rating. Is that correct?
Yes. Even in the closed position, it's still hurricane rated.
Okay.
So,
great.
But we encourage people to open it just because it will make it that much, that much
Less
better.
impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's very innovative. I was also allowed myself. We had one of the current most ambitious and successful architects on the islands, who was Craig Steely. He was our guest at the American Institute of Architectural Students Quad Conference that was hosted in February, and Craig Steely was our keynote speaker. So I also allowed myself to forward your product to him, because he's very forward-thinking and builds really, really nice, clean, simple houses. So if the telephone rings, we don't be surprised where that comes from.
Now.
So yeah, should turn it off after this show. It's going to ring all the time. So I think we're getting close to the end of this show. So I'm already thanking you guys very much for being here. And keep doing what you guys are doing. How can people get to your website? Will you say that briefly here?
Ecoshade.com.
It's that simple.
Very easy.
Yep.
Yeah,
Easy to remember.
Contact us.
I think you
phone
guys,
number and
you
email
guys
on
are there. And what I love about you guys are also the people who are on the job side. So it isn't like you're all in one. You do it.
We supervise.
Well, we figured you can't sell the thing unless you know how to make the thing. So.
So we're very experienced builders as well as.
No, it builds trust. I think that's my experience. That's really a product that looks very fancy, and it is, and it's amazing. But it's solid, and it works, and so I think that's a good combination to have. And so. With that, thank you guys very much again.
Our pleasure.
All the best
Thanks
of
for
luck
having us.
with that amazing eco-shaded Treetecture product. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
So thank you for watching us. This will have been the last episode of our show. That will be from here, because I'm going back to my motherland, Germany, on Saturday, and we'll be there for 3 months. And I will do my very, very best to provide you guys with excellent coverage from overseas, interesting new point of views from the other side of the world. And our co-host Ali Amashta will most likely then join us when I'm back from that. So thank you very much for watching. Bye.